She had always been a fighter. A black single mother working long hours at a local store, struggling to make ends meet but never once allowing herself to give up. Her name was Angela, and her world revolved around her children. Everything she did, every sacrifice she made, was for them. It wasn't easy, but Angela was determined to provide them with the best life she could. Even when the world seemed set against her, she stayed strong. She was used to the challenges that came with being a single mother, and being black in a country where systemic racism was a harsh reality made those challenges even harder. But Angela didn't let that stop her. It was a late evening, and Angela had just finished her shift at the store. Her feet ached as she walked down the street toward her small apartment. She didn't mind the walk. It gave her time to think about the day, reflect on her kids, and even plan for the next. Her life wasn't glamorous, but she always made the best of it. As she walked through the quiet streets, she thought about how hard it was for her kids to understand why their mother worked so much. She promised herself that one day, they would see the hard work pay off. They deserved so much more, and Angela wasn't going to let them settle for anything less. But tonight, things would be different. As Angela approached the corner near her apartment, she noticed the flashing lights of police cars in the distance. She didn't think much of it at first. Police were always around, especially in neighborhoods like hers. The officers seemed to patrol these streets more than any other part of the city. Angela had become used to seeing their cars, the way they eyed people as they passed by, sometimes even stopping to question people without reason. Still, she didn't expect anything to happen to her. Suddenly, she heard a voice call out from behind her. "Hey, stop right there." Angela froze, her heart rate quickening. The voice came from a man in uniform, and before she could even process what was happening, two more police officers stepped out from a nearby squad car. Their uniforms were crisp, but their eyes, their expressions, were anything but friendly. "What's your name?" the officer asked gruffly. Angela swallowed hard. Her body stiffened, a feeling of unease creeping into her chest. She had seen how things could escalate in moments like this, especially when it involved black people and law enforcement. But she had done nothing wrong. She wasn't a criminal. She was just a mother coming home from work. "I'm just going home," she said, her voice calm but filled with a quiet tension. She tried to take a step forward, to move past them, but one of the officers stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You got a problem," he sneered, narrowing his eyes at her. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Angela felt a sharp pang in her stomach. She knew exactly what was going on. This wasn't about her being in a hurry or anything she'd done wrong. It was about her being a black woman walking the streets at night, and these officers were going to make an issue out of it. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. "I'm just trying to get home," she repeated, her voice a little firmer now. The officer took a step toward her, his body towering over hers. "I think you're lying," he said, his tone cold and dismissive. He looked her up and down, as if she was somehow less than him, less than anyone else on the street. Angela's heart raced. She knew this wasn't going to end well. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, trying not to let the fear that was rising within her take control. But it was hard. The situation was all too familiar, all too real. She could feel the eyes of the other officers on her, and the weight of their judgment hanging in the air. They were looking for a reason to escalate, and Angela had to stay calm. She had no choice but to comply, at least for now. But then, things took a turn she wasn't expecting. One of the officers grabbed her arm roughly, yanking her back toward him. Angela gasped in pain, trying to pull away, but his grip tightened. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she said, her voice shaking now with a mix of anger and fear. "You don't talk to me like that," the officer spat back, and in an instant, his partner stepped forward, shoving Angela against the squad car. Before she knew it, Angela was on the ground, her face pressed against the cold asphalt. Her body tensed with the force of the blow. Pain shot through her side, and she could taste the bitterness of the pavement on her lips. She struggled to get up, but the officers held her down, their hands pressing against her back and neck with brutal force. "You should have stayed quiet," one of the officers muttered, his breath hot on her ear. "You're lucky we don't charge you with resisting arrest." But Angela wasn't resisting. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her mind was racing as she tried to think of a way out, a way to stop this from getting worse. She didn't know how much more she could take. The pain was unbearable, but worse than that was the fear for her children. What if they found out? What if they had to grow up knowing their mother had been beaten, humiliated like this? Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled beneath their weight. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The officers ignored her pleas, their laughter cutting through the silence of the night. For a brief moment, Angela felt hopeless, as if she were nothing more than a target to be mistreated by those who were supposed to protect her. But then, in the darkness, a thought crossed her mind. Her brother. Her brother was the FBI director. She had never wanted to use his position for personal gain, but in this moment, she realized she had no other choice. She had to call him. It wasn't just for her, it was for her kids. It was for anyone who might find themselves in the same situation. With a trembling hand, Angela reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, her fingers slick with sweat. She dialed her brother's number. As the phone rang, she felt a surge of hope, mixed with fear. She didn't know what he could do, but she knew one thing for sure: he was her only chance. Angela's heart pounded in her chest as she lay on the cold ground, struggling to breathe beneath the weight of the officers. The sharp, painful grip on her arm and the rough shove against the squad car left her disoriented, but her thoughts were clear. The only thing that mattered was making sure her children wouldn't have to face the consequences of what was happening to her. She managed to dig her phone from her pocket, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. Each ring of the phone felt like an eternity, and with every moment that passed, Angela could feel her situation getting worse. Her mind raced as she remembered all the times she had warned her kids about the police, how she'd tried to teach them to stay calm in the face of injustice, never knowing she might be in a situation like this. It felt like the weight of all her fears was suddenly crashing down on her. When the phone finally clicked, her brother's voice on the other end was like a lifeline thrown to her in the middle of a storm. "Angela? What's wrong?" His voice was calm, but she could hear the immediate concern in his tone. Angela had always been close to her brother, even though they hadn't spoken much recently. He was the one who had always looked out for her when they were younger. He had a life of his own now, a powerful life as the FBI director, a life far removed from the struggles of their childhood. But in that moment, all that mattered was that he was her brother and he could help. "John," she gasped, her breath shaky, "I need you. They're hurting me. I don't know what to do." Her voice cracked as she said the words. The officers who had been taunting her just moments before were now pulling her up roughly by her arms, yanking her to her feet. The fear that had been gnawing at her all evening bloomed in her chest. The world around her blurred as the pain from the officer's grip on her wrists surged. She barely heard her brother speaking through the phone, but she felt a flicker of hope at the sound of his voice. "Calm down, Angela. I'm going to help you. You're going to be okay," John said firmly, his tone no longer the calm that it had been earlier. Angela could hear the shift, his voice now filled with authority and urgency. The officers, who had been ignoring Angela's distress, paused when they saw her phone pressed to her ear. The one holding her wrist tightened his grip for a moment, then shot a look at his partners. Angela's heart skipped a beat. They didn't know who she had called. They didn't know she had reached out to someone who could stop this. "I'm calling the shots now," John continued, his words now rapid as if he had already started working behind the scenes. "Stay on the line, don't hang up. I'm pulling every string I can. The situation's about to change." Angela clutched the phone, trying to stay still as the officers spoke among themselves, no longer quite as sure of themselves. One of them reached for her phone, but Angela held it tighter, not wanting to let go of the connection to her brother. She heard John barking orders, speaking with someone on the other end of the line, a mix of words that Angela couldn't quite make out. Then, the officer holding her arm suddenly let go. He took a few steps back, as if something had shifted. Angela's breath caught in her chest, but before she could react, another officer stepped forward, his face a mask of frustration. "Get her in the car," the officer ordered. He wasn't looking at Angela anymore, he was looking over his shoulder, clearly not wanting to provoke any more attention. Angela was shoved into the back of the police car with a force that made her vision blur. She pressed her back against the seat, trying to steady herself. Her phone still clutched in her hand, she tried to listen, but the words she heard from her brother were muffled as the officers slammed the door shut. Angela's heart was racing, but a small part of her felt relief. Her brother, John, was powerful. He wasn't just her family, he was the FBI director. She had no idea how he was going to fix this, but she knew one thing for sure, the officers had made a dangerous mistake. Inside the squad car, Angela sank back, her mind spinning. The weight of everything that had just happened hit her like a wave, but she forced herself to push it aside. She had to stay strong for her kids. They couldn't know what was happening. They couldn't see their mother being dragged through the dirt like this. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone vibrating in her hand. She picked it up quickly, pressing it to her ear. "Angela." John's voice came through again, clear and firm, a sense of power lacing his words now. "You're going to be okay. I've got people on this." She closed her eyes, letting out a deep breath, trying to hold onto that small thread of hope. "What are you doing? What can you do?" "I'm pulling every string, Angela. You're not going to go through this alone. You're going to be okay. Just stay calm." Angela didn't know what her brother had planned, but the power in his voice made her believe in him. She didn't know how long she'd be stuck in that car, but she knew that for the first time in a long time, someone was fighting for her. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe this nightmare would end. Maybe the system that had failed her for so long was about to meet the weight of the truth. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Angela pressed the phone tightly to her ear. She could feel her brother's presence on the other end, a silent force that she knew would move mountains for her. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Angela felt that the fight was. Angela sat in the back of the police car, her mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. Her thoughts kept jumping between her kids, the officers who had attacked her, and her brother, who was working tirelessly to make things right. But the overwhelming fear for her children lingered. She couldn't help but think of them, her little ones, waiting for her at home, unaware of the chaos unfolding around her. She thought of how they would feel if they knew their mother was being treated like this, unjustly dragged into something that had nothing to do with her. The drive to the police station felt like it stretched on for miles, though Angela couldn't focus on the street signs or the buildings passing by. Her body ached from the rough handling she had endured, and the quiet hum of the engine did nothing to soothe the anxiety gnawing at her. Every few moments, she glanced at the officers in the front seats, wondering what they were thinking. Did they realize that they had made a huge mistake? Or were they too arrogant to see the truth? The officer driving the car muttered to the other, his words barely audible over the sound of the engine. But Angela could tell they were both annoyed, their conversation filled with frustration that Angela hadn't just complied like they expected her to. They'd been thrown off by the phone call, that much was clear. They had no idea who they had just arrested. Angela, however, didn't know how much longer she could hold on. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to push back the tears that threatened to fall. She was a mother, not a criminal. But in this moment, she felt as though she were being painted with the same brush as those who had done wrong. She was a black woman, stopped by the police for no reason other than the color of her skin. It had happened before, to her and to so many others, but never this badly. Never with this kind of violence. Just when she thought she might lose her nerve, her phone buzzed again. Her brother's name flashed on the screen. Angela's heart skipped a beat as she answered it immediately. "Angela, listen to me." John's voice was steady and full of purpose, though she could hear the stress beneath it. "I've contacted the local authorities. I've made sure they know about your situation. They're going to make sure this gets handled right. I don't want to be in jail, John. I didn't do anything wrong. I just want to go home to my kids." Angela's voice cracked, and she could feel the sting of tears behind her eyes. "I know," John replied, his tone softening, "and you will. I'm making sure of that. I've already spoken to the people I trust. They're getting to the bottom of this right now. They're going to investigate those officers." Angela nodded even though she knew he couldn't see her. She held the phone tighter, as if his words were the only thing keeping her grounded. She knew her brother wasn't just talking, he was doing something. He always did. She trusted him more than anyone. But the uncertainty of the situation was hard to shake. As the car finally pulled up to the station, Angela's stomach churned. She had never been inside a police station, not for something like this. She wasn't sure what was waiting for her there, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. The officers didn't even glance at her as they opened the door and yanked her out of the car. They didn't say much to her as they marched her into the building, but Angela couldn't help but notice how their attitudes had shifted since the earlier chaos. The cocky bravado they had shown outside seemed to have evaporated, replaced with a sense of discomfort. Perhaps they realized that their actions were being scrutinized now, that they weren't going to get away with it as they might have in the past. Angela didn't care why they were acting differently, she just wanted to make it out of there with her dignity intact. Inside the station, they shoved her into an empty room, the cold walls making her feel small. She stood in the middle, her hands cuffed in front of her, still trying to catch her breath. The officers left her there alone, the door clicking shut behind them. The silence was deafening. Angela felt like she was suspended in time, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. Then her phone buzzed again. It was John. Angela didn't hesitate before answering. "Angela," he said, his voice much firmer now, "they know what happened. The investigation's already started. I've got people in there asking questions about those officers, and it won't take long before they see the truth." Angela closed her eyes in relief. She had always known that her brother had connections, that his position in the FBI gave him an edge most people didn't have. But hearing the confidence in his voice made her believe it. She wasn't alone anymore. "What about them?" Angela asked, her voice low. "What will happen to them?" "They'll be held accountable," John said firmly. "I've made sure of it. You've done nothing wrong, Angela. You're going to be okay." She nodded, even though she knew he couldn't see her. But the truth was, she didn't know how this would end. She didn't know if she would ever fully feel safe again, knowing that there were people out there who saw her as less than human. But for now, she clung to her brother's words, the only thing that seemed to offer any hope in this storm. After a long, tense wait, the door to the room opened again. This time, it wasn't the officers who came in, but a man in a suit, holding a clipboard. He didn't introduce himself at first, but Angela could tell from the way he looked at her that he wasn't just some regular officer. His demeanor was different, respectful, even sympathetic. "I'm Agent Williams," he said, his voice calm. "I've been assigned to help you with this situation. I understand that you've been through a lot already. Angela looked up at him, wondering what his role was in all of this. Was he here to intimidate her? Or was he really on her side? She said nothing, only nodding slowly. I know you're scared, Agent Williams continued. But you're not alone. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We'll make sure those officers are held responsible for their actions. Angela didn't know if she could trust him, but something about his words, the way he spoke with authority but without the arrogance of the other officers, made her feel a flicker of hope. Thank you, Angela whispered, unsure if her words were enough. She wanted to say more, but everything she had been through that night left her feeling drained. As the minutes stretched on, Angela found herself wondering how this would all end. Would she walk out of here as a victim of a system that failed her, or would she be part of something larger, something that would finally hold those responsible accountable? She didn't know yet, but one thing was certain, this fight wasn't over. And Angela wasn't going to stop until justice was done. Angela sat in the stark, cold interrogation room, her hands still shaking from the events of the night. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting an unwelcoming glow on the plain walls. Her body felt stiff from being forced into the uncomfortable position the officers had placed her in earlier. But it wasn't the discomfort of her physical body that weighed most heavily on her. It was the uncertainty, the feeling of being stuck in limbo. What was going to happen to her? How long would she have to wait for things to get better? She couldn't answer those questions, not yet. She had been waiting for what felt like hours, though she had no idea what time it was. Her thoughts kept spiraling between the fear and the faint hope that her brother, John, would be able to fix this. But the question loomed over her, would things truly change, or was she just another black woman caught up in a system that didn't care about her? The door opened again. Angela's heart skipped a beat, but when she saw who stepped inside, it wasn't who she expected. A different officer, one who looked much younger than the others, entered the room. He wasn't wearing a standard uniform like the others, instead, he wore a plain suit, the kind that suggested he was a part of an internal investigation team. His expression wasn't hostile, but it wasn't exactly warm either. There was a sense of professionalism in his eyes that made Angela immediately curious. Miss Angela, he said, his voice calm, I'm Detective Parker. I've been assigned to your case. Angela looked up at him, trying to gather her thoughts. She hadn't been sure what to expect from the officers involved in the investigation. But when he said your case, it felt like the first glimmer of recognition that she wasn't just some random person in the system anymore. Someone was finally looking at her as an individual, as a person whose story mattered. It gave her a small sense of relief, though she remained cautious. You've been through a lot, Detective Parker continued, pulling a chair and sitting across from her. I want to make sure we handle this properly, with respect and fairness. Angela nodded slowly. It felt strange to hear him speak in such a manner, considering everything that had happened earlier. It almost felt like too little too late, but she wasn't going to dismiss it. Not yet. She just wanted to hear more, to see where this would lead. Can you tell me what happened last night? Detective Parker asked, looking at her with an open expression. He didn't seem like he was trying to trick her or catch her in a lie. His tone was neutral, but not accusatory. Angela inhaled deeply, her chest tightening as she relived the nightmare from the night before. She told him the story, the details of what had happened from the moment she had been stopped on the street to the moment she'd been dragged into the police car. She recounted the officer's harsh words, the pain she had felt, the fear for her children. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she didn't stop. She had to make him understand what had happened to her. She had to make it clear that she wasn't lying. She wasn't imagining things. It wasn't just the beating, she said quietly. It was everything, how they looked at me, how they treated me like I didn't matter. Like I wasn't even a person. Detective Parker listened intently, nodding occasionally as if he was absorbing every word. When she finished, he took a moment before responding. "I understand," he said. "And I believe you." The words were simple, but they meant something to Angela. She hadn't heard those words from anyone else in the room. Not the officers who had hurt her, not the others who had stood by and said nothing. Detective Parker's words gave her a feeling she hadn't expected: hope. "I'm not here to make excuses for what happened," he continued. "But I want to make sure you know this investigation is serious. I've already begun looking into those officers. Their history, their behavior. I won't let this go without the proper accountability." Angela felt her heart rate slow just a little. It was something. It was progress. But she couldn't let herself get too comfortable. She needed to see action, not just words. She needed to know that things were going to change for real, that the officers who had wronged her would face consequences. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice still shaky but firmer than before. "We'll start with the immediate investigation into the incident itself," Detective Parker replied. "I'm pulling the video footage from the area. I'm also reaching out to other officers who may have witnessed what happened. I've been in touch with your brother, and he's been very helpful, but this will be handled through the right channels." Angela's chest tightened again, but this time with something other than fear. It was a mix of frustration and relief. Frustration because she had been through so much already, and relief because finally, someone seemed to be listening. The system had failed her in so many ways, but here was a man in front of her who promised to try and fix it. Detective Parker paused, his eyes studying her closely. "I know this is hard, but I need you to trust the process. It's going to take time, but I'll do everything I can to make sure this doesn't slip through the cracks." Angela nodded again, her thoughts swirling. Time. How much time would it take? What would happen in the meantime? Would those officers continue to patrol the streets, unaffected by their actions? Would the pain of what had happened to her haunt her for the rest of her life? The questions felt endless, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a small breath of relief. As the minutes stretched on, Detective Parker asked a few more questions: details about the officers' physical descriptions, their names, the events surrounding the incident, but it wasn't as important anymore. What mattered was that someone was listening, and that for the first time in a long while, Angela wasn't just a statistic in a broken system. She was a person who deserved justice. When the interview finally ended, Detective Parker stood up, offering a hand to Angela. "We'll be in touch. Thank you for your patience." Angela took his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you," she whispered, though her voice was still filled with uncertainty. But as the door closed behind him, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that something might actually change. Days passed since Angela's meeting with Detective Parker, but she hadn't heard much more from him. Each day felt like it stretched on longer than the last, with no real news, no concrete answers. Her thoughts constantly swirled between the pain of the night she had endured and the hope that something, anything, might come of the investigation into the officers who had hurt her. Despite the uncertainty, Angela tried her best to focus on her children. She had to stay strong for them. She didn't want them to see how afraid she was, how lost she sometimes felt. They deserved better than that. She had to keep pushing forward, keep pretending that everything was normal, even when it felt like her world had been turned upside down. But it wasn't easy. Angela found herself staring out the window, wondering when her life would feel safe again. She remembered how, as a child, she used to hear stories about how the police were there to protect people, to keep them safe. Those stories seemed so distant now. She thought about all the people who had told her that justice was supposed to work for everyone, but in her case, it had failed her. She had done everything right, but still, she was treated as though she was invisible, as if she didn't matter. One evening, as she sat with her kids at the dinner table, Her phone buzzed. Angela's heart skipped a beat. She picked it up quickly, almost knocking over her glass of water in the process. It was a message from Detective Parker. The text was brief, but it carried weight. I need you to come to the station tomorrow morning. We have news. Angela's hands shook as she read the words. News. What did that mean? Was it good news? Was it bad? She could feel her stomach tighten with anxiety. But she had no choice. She had to go. There was no way around it. The next morning, Angela found herself walking into the police station once again, her mind filled with a mix of dread and anticipation. As she entered the building, the familiar coldness of the air and the sterile atmosphere seemed more suffocating than ever before. Her shoes clicked against the floor as she made her way to the same interrogation room where she had spoken with Detective Parker. When she entered, she was surprised to see not just Detective Parker, but also several other people seated around a table. There was a man in a suit who looked like he might be a lawyer, and another woman, who Angela guessed was from Internal Affairs. Their faces were serious, but there was no hostility in their expressions, just determination. They all stood up as she entered, greeting her with small nods. Thank you for coming, Miss Angela, Detective Parker said, gesturing for her to sit. We have an update for you. Angela sat down, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but her mind couldn't stop racing. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the present moment. Whatever was coming, she was ready to hear it. She had no other choice. The man in the suit spoke first. Miss Angela, we've completed the investigation into the officers involved in your arrest. We've reviewed their body cam footage, interviewed witnesses, and looked into their previous conduct. His tone was serious, but there was a small hint of compassion in his eyes. We have determined that the officers violated several procedures, including the use of excessive force. As a result, they will be facing disciplinary action. Angela blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Disciplinary action? That was it? Was that all? She had hoped for more, hoped for something stronger, but she had to remind herself that this was just the beginning. It wasn't over yet. Detective Parker continued, we've also referred this case to the district attorney's office. They will be reviewing the charges against these officers. They may face criminal charges depending on the findings of the DA's office. Angela's heart beat faster as she absorbed the news. This was it, this was the change she had been hoping for. The officers weren't just going to get away with what they had done. There was a chance they would face real consequences for their actions. The feeling of relief washed over her, but it didn't erase the fear or the pain of what she had experienced. The woman from Internal Affairs spoke next. We are also conducting an audit of the department's handling of situations like this. We know that systemic issues like this don't just involve a few bad apples, and we're committed to making real changes to ensure this doesn't happen again. Angela didn't know whether to cry or to shout in relief. Her body felt like it was heavy with exhaustion, but her mind was racing with 100 different thoughts. This was justice, real justice. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't everything she wanted, but it was something. It was progress. And that, at least, was enough for now. Detective Parker leaned forward, his voice softer now. We understand this is a lot to take in, Angela. But I want you to know that we're here to support you. You've been through a traumatic experience, and you don't have to go through it alone. If you need anything at all, we're here for you. Angela nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had no idea how to express the weight she felt in that moment. She had been hurt, yes, but now there was a sense that the world might be starting to change for the better. Her brother, John, had helped her make this possible, but it wasn't just him. It was everyone in that room, working together, taking responsibility. I just want to thank you all, Angela said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I didn't think anything like this would happen. I didn't think anyone would listen. But you did." The man in the suit nodded, a small but genuine smile on his face. "It's our job to listen. It's our job to make sure people are treated fairly. And we're going to keep doing that." As the meeting wrapped up, Angela felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't naive enough to think the fight was over. There was still so much work to be done. But today she had taken back a small piece of her dignity. She had been heard. And that was enough to make her believe that, with time, things could get better. As she left the station, the world didn't seem as heavy as it had before. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Angela didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. And that hope was enough to keep moving forward.